All right, I lied. One more lecture before I go home. This one's really cool and it's short, so I figured, let's do it now. Analyze changes in sales using the degree of operating leverage. The reason why I think this one's cool is because often you will hear people talk about like the degree of operating leverage in various contexts. I once heard it explained in terms of people riding BART, the Bay Area Rapid Transit System in the Bay Area. I mean, it basically sucks, but somebody was saying, look, if the general population decided that they were going to move from driving cars to taking BART, and it's not the entire population, that's unreasonable. But what they were saying was, look, what if it was the case that 10% of all car drivers decided to stop driving their car and instead they would take BART? That 10% change in drivers isn't going to be a 10% increase in riders at BART because there's fewer people riding BART. And so a 10% change in drivers would yield like a 40% change in BART ridership. So what they're saying is, or what this individual was arguing, small changes in driving habits lead to much bigger changes in public transportation ridership because of the fact that there are so many people driving and so few people taking BART. And so that is what we're talking about in this lecture. We're just trying to figure out what is operating leverage. Okay, so in our example, we are saying the formula, in essence, the degree of operating leverage, it's the contribution margin divided by income. Okay, so maybe we can look at this. Contribution margin divided by income. So in our example, right, we have a contribution margin of 36,000 and income of 12,000. And so again, the formula is contribution margin divided by income. So we're saying 36,000 divided by 12,000 is 3. So we have a degree of operating leverage of 3. And by itself, that doesn't seem all that relevant, right? But that is simply step 1. And therefore, step 2 could be, hey, you know what? If I have a change in sales of 10%, right? So if my sales increase by 10% and I have a degree of operating leverage of 3, a 10% increase in income is going to yield a 30% increase in income, right? That's really cool stuff. And just to highlight what we're looking at, bear with me. Let me see if I can zoom in here. Right, so we're saying, look, if our sales increase by 10%, our sales would go from 120,000 to 132,000. That 10% increase is going to be a 30% increase in our income. We're going to move from 12,000 to 15,600. Right? If our BART ridership increases by 10%, the impact to BART is a 30% increase to BART. So in our example, these are drivers and these are BART riders. But it's better in our instance when we can say, hey, listen, man, if we can generate 10% more in revenue, it's going to have a 30% increase in our bottom line, which is a really, really cool way of thinking about this type of stuff.